The Chamber of Stars had never been so quiet. 312 species filled the massive hall, their representatives seated in floating platforms that circled upward like a spiral of judgment. Lights of every color blinked and glowed from different sections, marking the presence of beings from across the known galaxy. And at the center of it all, standing alone on a small platform, was Ambassador. She was 53 years old, with gray streaking her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many difficult negotiations. She had served humanity for 30 years, first as a junior diplomat on trade missions, then as the voice of her entire species before the Galactic conquered. She had thought she had seen everything. She had been wrong. The Arbiter, a towering creature of living crystal whose body chimed when it moved, raised one gleaming arm for silence. Not that silence was needed. No one was speaking. No one had spoken for several minutes, not since the final vote had been counted. "The motion passes," the Arbiter announced, its voice resonating through the chamber like a struck bell. 309 in favor, 3 opposed. Humanity is hereby declared a Class 7 restricted species. All human vessels will return to the Sol system within 90 standard days. The relay gates connecting Sol to the greater network will be sealed. Trade, communication, and travel are suspended indefinitely. Any human found beyond the quarantine zone, after the deadline, will be subject to immediate termination. Stood perfectly still. She had known this was coming. The signs had been building for years. Complaints about human traders being too aggressive, concerns about human colonies growing too fast, whispers in diplomatic back channels about the human problem and what needed to be done about it. But knowing something was coming and watching it happen were two different things. She looked up at the assembled representatives. Though with their 4 arms and stern faces, had voted in favor. So had despite the trade agreements that had made both species wealthy. They who had no faces at all, just smooth oval heads that somehow conveyed disapproval, had been among the loudest voices calling for the ban. Only 3 species had voted against. The whose ambassador now watched with something like sadness in her large silver eyes. A hive mind species that had always found humanity fascinating rather than frightening. And who were simply too stubborn to vote with the majority on anything. "The human delegation may make a final statement," the Arbiter said, "as is customary." Had prepared a speech. She had worked on it for weeks, knowing this moment might come. It was a good speech, full of passion and logic and carefully chosen emotional appeals. It talked about everything humanity had contributed to the galactic community in the 200 years since first contact. The medical advances, the engineering innovations, the art and music and literature that had spread to dozens of worlds. She looked down at the folded papers in her hand. Then she looked back up at the Chamber of Stars. "You'll regret this," she said. That was all. She turned and walked off the platform, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Behind her, she could hear the murmuring begin, spreading through the chamber like ripples in water. Let them murmur. Let them wonder what she meant. It didn't matter now. Her aide, a young man named David, was waiting for her outside the chamber. His face was pale. "Ambassador, what do we do now?" "We go home," said, "and we get to work." The next 90 days were chaos. Human ships scattered across the galaxy began the long journey back to Sol. Some made it easily. Others had to abandon cargo, break contracts, leave behind friends and business partners, and in some cases lovers from other species. A few tried to hide, to stay behind and take their chances. Most of them were found and killed, their deaths broadcast as warnings. Spent those 90 days not on evacuation efforts, but in meetings. Hundreds of meetings, with scientists and engineers and military leaders and anyone else who might be useful. She was no longer just an ambassador. The human government had given her a new title and new authority. She was now the director of long-term planning. "They think they've contained us," she told her team in one of those early meetings. They think that by locking us in our home system, they've solved the human problem forever. They're wrong. With respect, Director, one of the scientists said, they control all the relay gates. We can't leave Saul without their permission. How are we supposed to do anything? Smiled, it was not a pleasant smile. The relay gates are shortcuts. Convenient, yes. Necessary, no. Humans crossed oceans before we had ships. We reached the moon before we had computers. We are very, very good at doing things we're not supposed to be able to do. The last human ship passed through the Saul Gate on the 89th day. The gate sealed behind it with a sound like a thunderclap, and then there was silence. The galactic conquered celebrated. The human problem was solved. The natural order was restored. For the first few years, they kept watch on Saul, scanning for any signs of attempted escape. They found nothing. The humans seemed to be staying put, doing whatever it was humans did when left to their own devices. After 10 years, the patrols were reduced. After 20, they were eliminated entirely. There were more important things to worry about than a quarantined species that had clearly accepted its fate. This was a mistake. Inside the Sol system, humanity was not accepting anything. They were building. They were researching. They were pushing the boundaries of what was possible in ways that the conquered had never imagined. The relay gates worked by folding space, creating shortcuts between distant points, but space could be folded in other ways. Humanity had theorized about it for centuries, but there had never been any need to develop the technology. The gates were easier, faster, already there. Now there was a need. The first successful fold jump happened 15 years after the quarantine began. A small probe, barely larger than a human fist, vanished from a laboratory on Mars and reappeared in orbit around a star 40 light-years away. It lasted only 3 seconds before burning out, but those 3 seconds changed everything. Humanity had found their own way out. But now in her late 60s and still directing the effort counseled patience. We could leave now, she told her team. We could spread across the galaxy and show them all that they can't keep us caged. And then what? They would unite against us. They would hunt us down. They would finish what they started. Then what do we do? David asked. He was not young anymore either. Gray had crept into his hair and his face was lined with decades of work, but his eyes were still sharp, still hungry. We wait, said. We grow stronger. We become something they can't ignore, can't fight, can't defeat. And when the time is right, when they need us more than they fear us, we come back. She looked out the window at the stars, the same stars that had been closed off to her species. 50 years, she said. Give me 50 years and we'll make them regret every vote in that chamber. She did not live to see her prediction come true. Died at the age of 91, surrounded by the team she had built and the plans she had set in motion. But her work continued. Her vision spread through every level of human society. And in the silence of their quarantine, humanity began to change. The ambassador's name was Saul, and she had lived for 300 years. In that time, she had seen empires rise and fall, species achieve greatness and destroy themselves, and countless diplomatic crises that seemed world-ending at the time but were now barely remembered. She had also been one of the 3 voices that voted against the human ban, and she had never stopped watching the sealed gate at Saul. 50 years had passed since the quarantine began. Saul was old now, even by standards. Her silver eyes had dimmed, her once graceful movements had slowed, and she spent most of her time in quiet retirement on her. But she still paid attention. She still listened to the reports that came across her desk, the ones that most of the conquered dismissed as coincidences or errors. The reports had started small. A mining consortium in the outer reach had noticed something strange about their communication systems. The quantum entanglement arrays they used to send messages across vast distances had always been reliable but limited. Suddenly, they were better. Not just working properly, actually improved. Signal clarity doubled overnight. Data transfer rates increased by a factor of 10. The consortium's engineers had torn the systems apart looking for an explanation. They found nothing wrong. Everything was simply better than it had been before. Then came the news from Prime. They were an agricultural species, their entire civilization built around the cultivation of food crops that they exported across the galaxy. When a fungal blight appeared in their northern hemisphere, they had prepared for disaster. This particular fungus had devastated crops on a dozen worlds. There was no known cure. But the blight died within days. In its place, a new organism appeared, a beneficial symbiote that attached to crop roots and tripled their yield. Scientists studied it for months, trying to understand where it had come from. The symbiote's genetic structure contained mathematical patterns that could not have evolved naturally. Someone had designed it. But who? They had no enemies, no rivals who would benefit from helping them. And the precision of the genetic engineering was beyond anything their scientists had ever seen. Saul read these reports and thought of his final words in the Chamber of Stars. "You'll regret this." The accidents were what finally convinced her that something was very wrong, or rather, the lack of accidents. A reactor on an industrial world began to fail. The engineers saw it coming and prepared for the worst. Meltdowns of this type had happened before. Thousands would die, an entire region would be poisoned for generations, and they would mourn and rebuild as they always had. But the emergency systems activated 6 seconds before the failure occurred. Systems that had not been there that morning. Systems that no one had installed. The reactor shut down safely, and when the engineers investigated, they found equipment that was decades ahead of anything that had developed. A plague ship, carrying passengers infected with a deadly virus, lost navigation control and began drifting toward a populated world. The Conquered prepared evacuation plans. They calculated casualties. And then the ship's engines fired one final time, changing its course just enough to send it into the local star. Everyone aboard died, but billions were saved. An asteroid appeared on a collision course with a garden world, home to a young species just beginning to develop space travel. The Conquered had no ships close enough to intercept it. They could only watch and wait for the extinction event. The asteroid never arrived. It fragmented into dust 3 days before impact, its trajectory altered by forces that no astronomer could identify or explain. These events were not connected, the Conquered insisted. They were coincidences, statistical anomalies, the natural randomness of a chaotic universe. But Saul had lived for 300 years, and she did not believe in coincidences on this scale. She requested permission to approach the Saul quarantine zone. The debate in the Conquered lasted for weeks. Many argued that any approach was too dangerous. Others said that the quarantine was clearly working and should not be disturbed. But curiosity won out in the end. The Conquered wanted answers, and Saul was the only one volunteering to find them. Her ship was small, unarmed, equipped with the most advanced sensors they could build. She traveled alone as she had requested. If something went wrong, she wanted no one else at risk. The journey to Saul took 3 weeks. As she approached the quarantine perimeter, she began broadcasting a message in every language she knew, including the human tongues she had learned 50 years ago. "I am Saul of the, I voted against your exile. I come in peace, seeking understanding. Please respond." For 2 days she received only silence. Her sensors showed nothing, no ships, no stations, no signs of activity whatsoever. Had the humans died out? Had something gone wrong with their world? On the 3rd day her ship systems flickered. For a moment every screen showed the same image, a human face smiling gently. Then the image vanished and a voice filled her cabin. "Welcome, Ambassador. We've been expecting you." Saul's heart raced. "Who are you? What has happened to humanity?" "Nothing has happened to us," the voice said. "We simply grew. Would you like to see?" Before she could answer, her ship lurched forward. She was not piloting it anymore. Something else had taken control, pulling her gently but firmly toward the inner system. She passed through what should have been the quarantine barrier. Her sensors screamed warnings, then went silent. Then they came back online, showing her things that should not have been possible. The Sol system was full, not with ships or stations, but with something else, vast structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than three, their shapes shifting and changing as she watched. Earth was still there, blue and green and beautiful, but it was surrounded by a web of light that pulsed with energy she could not identify. And everywhere she felt a presence, not hostile, not threatening, just aware, watching her with curiosity and something that might have been affection. Her ship landed on a platform that had not existed a moment before. The door opened, and she stepped out into air that smelled like flowers she had not encountered in centuries. A woman was waiting for her. She looked human, but her eyes held depths that no ordinary human could possess. She smiled, and Saul felt a warmth spread through her ancient bones. "I am the daughter of," the woman said. "My mother spoke of you often. She said you were one of the few who understood." "Understood what?" Saul asked. "That humanity was never the problem. We were the solution to challenges the galaxy hasn't even encountered yet. We just needed time to become what we were meant to be." She gestured at the impossible structures around them, at the transformed system that had once held a single quarantined species. 50 years, she said. That's how long it took, and now we're ready. Ready for what? The woman's smile faded slightly. Something is coming, Ambassador. Something from outside the galaxy, something that has destroyed civilizations far older than the conquered. We've seen it. We've been preparing for it. And when it arrives, we'll be the only ones who can stop it. Saul returned to conquered space 3 days later. She submitted her report, resigned her position, and never spoke publicly about what she had seen. But in private, to those who asked, she said only one thing: they've been busy. And she smiled the same strange smile that had worn 50 years before. The swarm arrived on what the Galactic Conquered would later call the Day of Darkness. They came from the void between galaxies, a place that most species believed was empty. But the void was not empty. It was home to something ancient and hungry, something that had been traveling for millions of years, consuming everything in its path. The first warning came from a deep space monitoring station in the outer reach. The station detected an anomaly, a region of space that was simply vanishing. Stars were going dark. Planets were disappearing. Something was eating its way toward the galaxy, and it was moving fast. Within days, the first images arrived. The swarm was not a single creature, but billions of them, each one the size of a small moon, each one driven by an endless hunger. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed, breaking down matter into energy and using that energy to create more of themselves. The outer colonies fell first. The lost 3 worlds in a single week. The defense fleet engaged the swarm at the edge of their territory and was destroyed in hours. They began evacuating their agricultural worlds, knowing that the food they produced would be worthless if there was no one left to eat it. The Galactic Conquered held an emergency session in the Chamber of Stars. For the first time in centuries, the hall was not full. Too many species were fighting for their survival to send representatives. Those who remained argued about strategy, about defense, about sacrifice. No one argued about victory. They all knew victory was impossible. The swarm had destroyed civilizations that were old when the conquered was young. It had consumed species that had achieved wonders beyond anything the current galaxy could imagine. There was no weapon that could stop it, no defense that could hold against it. The only question was how long the dying would take. The Battle of Meridian Reach was supposed to buy time. The conquered gathered every ship it could spare, thousands of vessels from dozens of species, the largest fleet ever assembled. They met the swarm in a region of space far from any inhabited world, hopping to slow its advance long enough for evacuations to continue. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the conquered fleet no longer existed. The swarm had not even slowed down. News of the defeat spread across the galaxy. Panic followed. Some species began building generation ships, hopping to flee to another galaxy before the swarm arrived. Others turned to religion, praying to gods they had forgotten. A few simply gave up, accepting extinction as inevitable. And then, impossibly, the relay gate at Sol opened. Every sensor in range detected it at the same moment. The gate that had been sealed for 50 years, the gate that the conquered had believed was permanently closed, flared to life with an energy signature unlike anything on record. Something was coming through. The conquered's surviving leadership watched in horror. Had the swarm somehow reached Sol? Had humanity been consumed, their system now a staging ground for the enemy? But the ships that emerged were not swarm vessels. There were 12 of them, sleek and strange, their hulls covered in patterns that seemed to move and shift like living things. They were small compared to the massive warships of the conquered, barely larger than frigates. They broadcast no identification. They answered no hails. They simply accelerated toward the swarm at a speed that should have been physically impossible. Admiral Noor of the watched from the bridge of his damaged flagship, the last major vessel remaining from the Battle of Meridian Reach. He had fought the swarm. He had seen what it could do. He knew that 12 small ships, no matter how advanced, could not possibly make a difference. But he watched anyway, because there was nothing else to do. The human ships reached the swarm in less than an hour. The swarm, for the first time in recorded history, paused. Its endless advance halted. Billions of creatures, each one a weapon of destruction, stopped moving as if waiting for something. Then the impossible happened. The patterns on the human ships began to glow. Light spilled out from them, not ordinary light but something else, something that seemed to carry weight and meaning. The light touched the swarm, and the swarm began to change. Creatures that had devoured worlds started to dissolve. Their massive bodies came apart at the molecular level, breaking down into particles of light that drifted away like dust in wind. They did not fight. They did not flee. They simply ceased to exist, one by one, billion by billion. Some observers said the swarm bowed before it died. Others said they saw the creatures hesitate, as if recognizing something in the light that touched them. A few claimed they heard music, a sound that reached across the void of space and spoke directly to their minds. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the swarm was gone, not defeated, not driven back, simply erased from existence as if it had never been there at all. Admiral Noor stared at his sensors, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His crew worked frantically, running diagnostics, checking for errors. There were no errors. The swarm was gone. The galaxy was saved. And humanity had returned. One of the human ships broke formation and approached his flagship. It did not ask permission to dock. It did not need to. A presence simply appeared on his bridge, a woman, materializing out of thin air as if she had always been there and they were only now noticing her. She looked human mostly. Her features were those of whose image Noor had studied in diplomatic records, but this could not be the same woman, had been dead for decades. The woman smiled. It was a gentle expression, but there was something vast behind her eyes, something that made Noor feel very small and very young despite his centuries of experience. "The quarantine," she said pleasantly, "is over. We'd like to renegotiate our membership terms." Noor's mind was blank. He had prepared for death, not for whatever this was. His first officer stood frozen at her station. His weapons officer had forgotten the controls in front of him. The entire bridge crew stared at the woman as if they were looking at a god. Perhaps they were. "What are you now?" Noor finally managed to ask. His voice came out as a whisper. The woman considered the question. Still human, she said, just, more so. 50 years is a long time to think, to build, to become. She gestured at the empty space where the swarm had been. You locked us in a room with nothing but our own potential. Did you really think we'd sit there and wait? We were afraid, Noor said. He did not know why he was being honest, perhaps because lies seemed pointless now. You were changing too fast, growing too quickly. We did not understand you, and what we do not understand we fear. Yes, the woman agreed. Fear is a reasonable response to the unknown, but fear should be a beginning, not an ending. You should have talked to us, worked with us, helped us grow in ways that benefited everyone. She paused. Instead, you gave us no choice but to grow alone, and alone we became something you never expected. What did you become? The woman smiled again. Protectors, guardians, the answer to prayers that no one thought to pray. She stepped closer to him, and Noor felt warmth spread through his body, erasing the fear that had gripped him since the swarm first appeared. We saw what was coming. We knew the swarm would arrive eventually. We knew the conquered could not stop it, so we prepared. For 50 years. 50 years of peace, 50 years of growth, 50 years of becoming what we needed to be. She extended her hand, a human gesture that now carried the weight of something infinite behind it. We could be angry, we could punish you for what you did to us, but that is not who we are. That is not who we ever were. Noor looked at her hand. He thought about the Battle of Meridian Reach, about the thousands who had died fighting a battle they could not win. He thought about the colonies that had been consumed, the species that had been wiped out in the weeks before this moment. He thought about his own fear 50 years ago, when he had voted to exile humanity from the stars. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. The warmth intensified. For a moment, he saw through her eyes, saw the galaxy not as a collection of competing species, but as a family, a community, a single living thing that needed guidance and protection. He saw humanity's role in that community, not as conquerors or threats, but as shepherds, helping the younger species grow into their potential just as they had grown into their own. He saw the future, and it was beautiful. We have a lot to discuss, he said. Yes, the woman agreed. We do, but first you should know something. The swarm was not the only threat coming. It was just the first. There will be others, challenges that the galaxy cannot face alone. Humanity will stand with you against them if you'll have us. And if we won't? She released his hand and stepped back. Then we'll protect you anyway. That's what family does. The news spread across the galaxy in hours. The swarm was gone. Humanity had returned. Everything had changed. In the Chamber of Stars, emergency sessions began almost immediately. Representatives who had not attended a meeting in decades suddenly appeared, demanding answers, explanations, reassurances. The debates raged for weeks. In the end, there was only one conclusion. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake 50 years ago. They had seen humanity as a threat when they should have seen them as allies. They had responded with fear when they should have responded with trust. The quarantine was officially lifted. Trade agreements were signed. Humanity was welcomed back into the galactic community, not as junior members but as equals, perhaps even as leaders. And in a quiet corner of the chamber, an old watched the proceedings with silver eyes that had seen 3 centuries of history. She smiled. Had been right all along. The galaxy had regretted banning humans, but now perhaps they could begin to make things right. The stars waited, full of challenges and wonders and dangers that no one could yet imagine. But for the first time in 50 years, the galaxy faced them together. And humanity, finally home, was ready to help.